This is the video for Colonial Influences. Make sure you have this week's packet out and ready, and you've pre-marked the scale before beginning the lesson. Have a pen, pencil, or highlighter ready so you can mark the text as we go through the reading. Remember, I'm grading to make sure you're marking what you're supposed to, so make sure you mark everything you're told throughout the video. Colonial Influences. Hey, anyone have any good ideas? Our founding fathers did not invent the American system of government out of thin air. They, like other colonists, were influenced by many different ideas and traditions. The biggest influence came from their British heritage. Remember, the colonists were British until the American Revolution. Events in British history and things that were happening during their own time affected the way the founders thought government should work. So I want you to underline or highlight where it says, remember the colonists were British until the American Revolution. That's why a lot of our ideas come from the British, because we used to be British, so we had the same similar, ideas and similar culture. The founders didn't have the internet, so they got their ideas from books and other printed materials. What would have been on the minds of American colonists on the verge of a revolution? Let's take a peek at what might have been on the shelf of a private colonial library. King vs. Nobles, Round 1. Way back in the Middle Ages, England was ruled by a king who shared some of his powers with a wealthy nobility. The nobility would carry out the king's wishes, and the king would allow the nobles to make some local decisions. But in the early 1200s, King John tried to take all the power for himself. The angry nobles fought back. In 1215, they created a document called the Magna Carta that limited the power of the king and protected certain rights for the nobles. Underline or highlight that sentence from Magna Carta on. The Magna Carta that limited the power of the king and protected certain rights for the nobles. The nobility was powerful enough to force King John to sign the Magna Carta. This was a big deal because it introduced the concepts of limited government, rule of law, and due process. Underline or highlight those, and then put a star next to that on the side, because those are the reasons why the Magna Carta is important, because it came up with the idea of limited government, which means putting limits on the government, not letting the government have all the power. Rule of law, which means everyone follows the laws instead of a person. The laws are in charge of everyone. And due process, which means having your chance in court and go in front of a jury of your peers, having, your legal protections. So make sure you underline or highlight all of those and put a star next to it. It also helped create the nation's parliament, which is kind of like the Congress in the U.S. I'm now going to show you a quick video that goes with the Magna Carta. Make sure you pay attention to the video, because it'll help you with the questions at the end of this assignment. After that, we'll go right back to where we left off in the text and continue marking the text.
This may look like a plain, unassuming piece of parchment, but it's actually one of the most famous documents in the world. Magna Carta, meaning the Great Charter, has inspired people across the centuries, from Thomas Jefferson to Mahatma Gandhi. But why was the Charter originally created, and what does it actually say? Let us take you back to medieval England. It's the year 1215, and the ruler is King John. Many people believe that King John was one of the worst kings in history. He imprisoned his former wife, he starved his opponents to death, he allegedly murdered his own nephew, and pulled the beards of the Irish chiefs. King John had imposed heavy taxes on his barons in order to pay for his expensive foreign wars. If they refused to pay, he punished them severely or seized their property. The barons demanded that King John obey the law. When he refused, they captured London and John was forced to negotiate. The two sides met at Runnymede in June 1215. The result of the negotiations was written down by the king's clerks into the document we know as Magna Carta. Although most of the Charter's clauses dealt with medieval rights and customs, Magna Carta has become a powerful symbol of liberty around the world. The most famous clause which is still part of the law today, for the first time gave all free men the right to justice and a fair trial. No man shall be arrested or imprisoned except by the judgment of their equals and by the law of the land. To no one will we sell. However, this clause was not as liberal as it sounds. The Charter only applied to free men. The vast majority of people in 1215 were unfree peasants who were ruled over by their landowners. And although Magna Carta was intended to create peace between King John and his rebellious barons, England was plunged into civil war after the Pope declared the Charter invalid. When King John died of dysentery in 1216, 9-year-old Henry III took to the throne. To keep the peace, Magna Carta was reissued several times during the 13th century, until it was finally made part of English law. Magna Carta has lived on for 800 years and is echoed in the United States Declaration of Independence and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Perhaps Magna Carta's most important legacy is that everyone, including our leaders, must obey the law. What started out as a document of specific complaints from a group of barons has turned into an international symbol of liberty, without which we might not have the rights we value so much today.
I think we took a wrong turn. Fast forward over 400 years. The next document in the Colonial Library is the Mayflower Compact. It was written to solve basic problems. Who was in charge? The Pilgrims left England in a ship called the Mayflower, headed for Virginia colony in 1620. A strong storm blew the ship off course, and they ended up in what is now Massachusetts. This area was not under the control of the company that sent them, so the Pilgrims were in independent territory. They needed a government fast. The men agreed to create a new government and to follow its rules. In exchange, they would all protect each other. This is called self-government. So remember the Mayflower Compact. They came over on the Mayflower. Then they got here, and there was no one to be in charge of them. So they got together and made up a list of rules that they were going to follow. And if they're all going to follow the same rules, they agreed to protect each other. So forming a government, but without having a leader, where there's self-government. So I want you to underline everything from the men agreed to create a new government and to follow its rules. In exchange, they would protect each other. This is called self-government. So underline those last 3 sentences and put a star next to it on the side, because that star is why the Mayflower Compact is important. I'm now going to show you a small video to help you kind of put a connection to this Mayflower Compact. After the video, you'll continue on with the reading.
Number 13 is No More Kings.
Rocking and a rolling, smishing and a splashing over the horizon, what can it be? The Pilgrims sailed the sea to find a place to call their own. In their ship Mayflower, they hoped to find a better home. They finally knocked on Plymouth Rock, and someone said, "We're there." It may not look like home, but at this point I don't care. Oh, they were missing Mother England. They swore their loyalty until the very end. Anything you say, King, it's okay, King. You know it's kind of scary on your own. Gonna build a new land the way we planned. Could you help us run it till it's grown? They planted corn, you know, they built their houses one by one. And bit by bit they worked until the colonies were done. They looked around, yeah, up and down, and someone said, "Hooray! If the king could only see us now, he would be proud of us today." They knew that now they'd run their own land. But George III still vowed he'd rule them to the end. Anything I say, do it my way now. Anything I say, do it my way. Don't you get to feeling independent, 'cause I'm gonna force you to obey. He taxed their property, he didn't give them any choice. And back in England, he didn't give them any voice. That's called taxation without representation, and it's not fair. But when the colonies complained, the king said, I don't care. He even has the nerve to tax our cup of tea. To put it kindly, King, we really don't agree. Gonna show you how we feel. We're gonna dump this tea and turn this harbor into the biggest cup of tea in history. They wanted no more mothering land. They knew the time had come for them to take command. It's very clear you're being unfair, King. No matter what you say, we won't obey. Gonna hold a revolution now, King, and we're gonna run it all away with no more king.
We're going to elect a president.
No more king.
He's gonna do what the people want.
No more king.
We're going to run things our way.
No more king.
Nobody's gonna tell us what to do.
Rocking and a rolling, swishing and a splashing over the horizon. What can it be? Looks like it's going to be a free country.
Alright, now that you're back from the video, you should be on page 2, at the top, King vs. Noble, round 2. Meanwhile, back in England, the Parliament had been battling it out with the King in a series of civil wars. Parliament eventually came out on top and passed the English Bill of Rights in 1689. Like the Magna Carta, this document expanded the rights of Parliament and the people, while limiting the powers of the King even more. This document was well known because it affected the people living in Britain and the new British colonies in America. So underline or highlight, like the Magna Carta, this document expanded the rights of Parliament and the people while limiting the powers of the King even more. And then put a star next to that on the side. So that's why the English Bill of Rights was important. If you look over here on the right, it kind of gives you a couple pieces, an excerpt of the English Bill of Rights. The Englishmen, we demand free elections to Parliament, so they want to be able to vote for their own people. The right to bear arms, which means, the right to have weapons to protect themselves from the king. To petition the government, so if you want something changed, to be able to fill out a petition and send it in, and fair trial. No excessive bail or fines or cruel and unusual punishment. So these are the rights that every Englishman has that the king cannot violate, which also means not just the British people in England, but the British people living in America at the time also had these basic rights. Breaking news. Colonist style. In addition to older documents, the colonists kept track of what was happening in Britain and around the colonies. They couldn't phone, blog, tweet, or watch TV. So how do they keep up with the news of the day? Hot off the press. In the 1720s, authors using fake names Cato the Elder and Cato the Younger published a series of newspaper editorials in Britain. The authors argued against the king's heavy-handed rule. These articles were titled Cato's Letters, and they were also published in colonial American newspapers. Cato's letters became so popular that they were collected into a book. Half of the private libraries in colonial America owned a copy. Cato's letters discussed many different ideas, such as freedom of expression, which became very influential in the colonies. Calling for independence. By the 1700s, King George III and Parliament were making more and more demands on the colonies. Many were getting fed up and began to meet and discuss breaking away from Britain. In the mid-1770s, representatives from most of the 13 colonies met in Philadelphia. Here, the founders discussed the options for the future. While these meetings were happening, a journalist named Thomas Paine published a pamphlet called Common Sense. Underline or highlight that sentence. Thomas Paine published a pamphlet called Common Sense in 1776. In Common Sense, Paine did not introduce any new ideas. Instead, he explained the arguments for independence in a way that was easy for everyday colonists to understand. He encouraged them to support the fight for independence from Britain. Just 6 months later, the Declaration of Independence was signed. So what Thomas Paine did was he wrote a small book, a pamphlet called Common Sense, and then he wrote it on a level where the everyday person who would read the book would understand it. So he didn't make it sound like some sophisticated textbook. He wrote it on the everyday man's level. so that they would read it, and when they're reading it, it's trying to explain the reasons why America should leave Great Britain and become independent. After you've finished marking the text, you now have the handout that goes with it. If you look at the handout, it says the big idea, and it lists what we're talking about. Next to it says, I think it means, and then next to that is the class definition. Go ahead and fill out the I think it means, so you write down why you think it's important. We will go over, tomorrow, the class definition, and compare the two to make sure you fully understand the concepts. Then, when you turn the page from that, on the back you have a handout. Read the instructions, and match the letters to where they go. Once you've completed the handout that goes with this assignment, you can go back and use the computers to finish the vocabulary you started yesterday. If you finish with all of that, raise your hand and let me know.